Hello everyone and welcome back to Send It's Weather channel, where today we are back with the latest looking at the model output for the next few weeks. And let me just say, the keyword here is uncertainty. But one thing that is for certain is it is definitely going to turn colder in the UK. The difficulty is, how cold will it be? Will there be any dreaded snow? And how long will it last for? Now, again, we're not looking at anything too extreme at the moment, just, a little bit below average, maybe a few wintry showers scattering, mostly in the north over higher ground, but may reach lower levels at points, but we're just looking to see if we can identify any trends. The real cold's not going to arrive until end of November, start of December, as I stated in my winter forecast. But yeah, we'll have a look at the latest, because it might turn colder. In fact, it will turn colder, but how cold will it be? We've had a very, very mild start to November, but maybe it'll be a month of two halves. Let's see what the models are predicting today. So, as always, if you enjoyed today's video, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. I do appreciate your continued support. But yeah, we're going to start by looking at lower pressure out to the west of the UK and high pressures to the east and southeast, and winds are in from a southwesterly direction. So we are looking unsettled, but mild, pretty mild for all areas. Now, by around Thursday and Friday, the 14th, I should say, got higher pressure beginning to build out in the North Atlantic. We've got an amplification of the high pressure up towards Greenland. We've got a low pressure system out to the west and southwest of the UK, and we're dragging in a mild south-southeasterly flow. But for the far north, we are beginning to tap into some colder air from the east-northeast. So a bit of a battle going on, but you can see mildish for the southern and central Britain, but colder air is beginning to sink into the far north. So there could actually be some winteriness over the Scottish mountains through Thursday, Friday into the weekend. But as you can see, on this latest GFS run, higher pressure ridges through the country through the weekend, so keeping things mostly dry and frosty, possibly on the nights. Could be some quite cold nights before higher pressure retrogresses in the Atlantic. A big blocking high. That is pretty common from all these models, though. A big blocking high, 1,050 millibars in the North Atlantic. Lower pressure to the east over Denmark, winds in from a northerly direction, and it looks to be turning quite cold. Mostly dry, but quite cold. However, another curveball the GFS has thrown in its recent runs, not recent, is this area of low pressure forming within the flow, a low in the flow, and that slides through the UK and puts any hope of any cold basically on the back burner, because you can see cold air gets into northern Scotland, so they might have quite a bit of snow up there, but that cold air does never really get into the UK on this latest run. So we've got an area of low pressure to the south, and that is a very deep area of low pressure. Looks very stormy for the south there on that run. I really cannot see it happening, but who's to say it wouldn't? You can't rule it out. But look, there's an area of low pressure sliding through the south of the UK, developing within that colder air, cooler, colder air, and you can see it's bringing some unsettled conditions to the far south. Again, as it clears out of the way, we've still got blocking to the northwest, so it does turn things colder eventually, but would be mostly dry. And we don't really get the cold air in fully before the Atlantic makes its return and is moving back in. So a very, very unreliable picture, I must say, is being painted here. It looks not that cold, besides in the far north, which might actually see quite a bit of snow over the Scottish glens and the like. If we move on to the GM to see what that is showing, again, low pressure out to the west, trying to move in from the southwest up to the UK. Doesn't quite get in before higher pressure builds through the country. So keeping it mostly dry, maybe a bit frosty, but mostly mild is the general theme. And then into next week, higher pressure retrogresses into the Atlantic up towards Greenland and turns things quite cold. Does get the cold air in for all, besides the far south. I must say the far south is not looking great for getting this proper cold air in. That'll come later, I'm pretty sure, towards the end of the month into start December. But for other areas, as far south as like the Midlands, for example, colder air is moving in by around day 10. But earlier than that, you can see that it does try and get in, but it is, with this scenario, mostly dry, maybe a few wintry showers in the north and the east. But apart from that, not too much going on. Now, I must say that this low pressure system moving up from the southwest through Thursday and Friday could bring a lot of rainfall. That is one to watch over the next few days. Depending on its exact position, will determine how much rain that we could see across the UK, because some runs build that high in, and then obviously they've got the milder air undercutting that. So we'll have to see how that goes, but it could be quite a wet and horrible day on Thursday and Friday this week. But yeah, turning colder with the GM, but of course it's the most unreliable model out of the lot. Moving on to the ECM, then you can see lower pressure through the UK through Tuesday into Wednesday. By Thursday, that's beginning to be pushed to the southwest before higher pressure building out in the Atlantic over the top of the UK. ECM's been very, very uncertain on this. So you can see through the weekend, higher pressure is fully through the country. It's pretty much sat right on top of the UK, but also to the northwest. Eventually, it pulls out in the North Atlantic, but with this one, we get a west-based NAO, which means that the high pressure goes to the Canadian side of Greenland. So that actually allows low pressure systems to easily slide underneath. You need the high pressure basically centered further to the east, so right over the top of Greenland. That's a bit too far west to really see that colder air from the north. You can see lower pressure systems sliding underneath. So with this caveat, higher pressure really gets going to the western side of Greenland, and you can see it turns very mild higher pressure over to the south of the country, bringing a very mild southwesterly flow into that second half of the month. So very mild. Can't see the upper air temperatures, but you can imagine very mild conditions. Maybe signs of higher pressure retrogressing into the final frames and looks quite cold to the north, but it's the last frame of the run, so but this ECM really is a caveat. It's very unsettled and very mild as well. Doesn't really get cold air in at all, besides from the far north briefly. So definitely one to watch. But one model that has been on board with cold from the very start is the most reliable model, the AIFS, the Artificial Intelligence ECM run. Let's see what that is showing. Low pressure out to the southwest again of the UK, so maybe a little bit unsettled in the west and southwest again through Thursday and Friday, maybe further north as well, but uncertain on the details. But then you can see by the weekend higher pressure ridging out into the Atlantic, up towards Greenland, but we are, again, because of the exact positioning of the high pressure, it's just out to the west of the UK, but we're still under the influence of the high pressure, so mostly dry, but definitely turning colder for all with this run. Again, it ridges out again very briefly in the Atlantic, bringing down a little surge of colder air for all, but again, higher pressure topples through the country. It's kind of like a topple high, and we do look quite cool. I won't say cold though with this, looks quite cool with a west-northwesterly sort of tilt to the airflow. So definitely a lot of uncertainty to nail down. This is what all the models always do this. Every single year they go to an uncertain pattern and all of a sudden they nail it down like a day before. If we have a look at the ensembles, obviously this is the best way to gauge at this range what the patterns are. Well, you can see that with the GFS 6Z ensembles, which they are the most unreliable suite of the runs, but you can see that quite good consistency for the runs to turn quite cold. The -5 line is the threshold for cold weather here in the UK, and you can see it getting down to that for a few days between around the 17th and the 20th of November. Does return back to average in the longer term, albeit with a lot of scatter, so some quite cold runs down here and some mild runs up here. But if we look at the current trends, you can see quite unsettled, especially over the weekend, in about 5 days away on Saturday. Friday into Saturday looks quite unsettled for most areas, particularly central southern Britain. But overall, it starts out mild for the next few days, up to around the 15th. Then we do see a distinctive drop to cooler or colder conditions, and there are some quite cold runs in there, but generally remaining below average through the second half of the month is the general trend. Can see some big outliers in there. They need to be nailed down as well. Comparing that to the ECM ensembles, well, these have taken a bit of a turn for the worse if you're a coldie, because they've really, really wobbled today. So if you have a look at that milder spell for the next few days, then there's that cooler interlude. You can see it does go below average, below the 30-year average line, but it's definitely nowhere near as a distinct signal as the GFS ensembles, which of course are more unreliable. But you can see many more milder runs mix in the mix, and not that many getting down to this -5 line, the threshold for colder weather, and this is a central location. If you go further southwards to London, you can see very much so that it's not really favoured at the moment. Not many runs at all getting down to the -5 line, and returning just very slightly below average. It looks quite mild for the south on this run from the ECM, but like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty. If you compare that to the ECM AI model, you can see much more of a distinctive drop. Look at that. It's only going out to the 20th of November, but look at that drop. They're going down to -5. If you look at the full run from the midnight, you can see cold spell for a few days there in the south, and that might even bring a little bit of winteriness if that run came off from the ensembles, which is all the runs together. But you can really see it's a very uncertain picture. A little bit further northwards up to my hometown of Barnsley, you can see again cold spell staying around for a few days before returning back to milder conditions. Anything beyond day 10 is very uncertain at this time frame and really does need to be nailed down. But what I would say is the general trend is it's going to be mild for the next few days with an unsettled spell over the weekend, but then possibly and is likely to turn colder, at least for a time. Exact details are unknown, such as any snow risks, anything like that, cannot be nailed down at this range. It is too far out to say. But you can see if I have a look for my central England, there's a few snow spikes showing up, but nothing too major. You wouldn't expect too much with this sort of pattern, to be honest. So yeah, that's that. But yeah, it could turn colder for all through next week. But devil's in the details on what will develop. But I'll keep you posted as always in the video. So thank you all very much for watching today's video. Again, if you did enjoy it, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. I do appreciate your continued support, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye, everyone.